When you look into almost any classroom, you find all of the varieties of strength and talent and weakness and fear and doubt and aspiration that we can find anywhere. Students from different language groups, different cultures represented. And to look at that variety and assume that it would be best taught in only one way seems to fly in the face of logic. Seems much more logical and much richer to develop a diversity of ways to teach the diversity of students in the classroom. A WebQuest is an instructional strategy that invites students to do research on a topic that's germane to the subject that they're studying using internet resources. For teachers, it provides a wonderful opportunity to reach out for students' varying readiness levels, interest, and learning profiles.
In this program, University of Virginia professor Carol Tomlinson helps us examine how WebQuests can be used to differentiate instruction. We'll visit Teresa Benyi's 9th grade English class in St. Paul, Minnesota. Joining them for portions of a 5-day WebQuest, we'll see how the teacher differentiates the experience to deepen her students' understanding of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and its connection to their lives today.
In my regular 9th grade classes, just like in most other grades, I have a large range of students. There are students who have learning differences or learning disabilities, as it's known in some parts of the country, as well as students who qualify for GCT services. And so when you look at any given class, you have students who need a lot of scaffolding and support, and then you also have students who have finished whatever the task is 5 minutes into it, which is why the WebQuests are really useful or helpful to give those students the appropriate level of challenge that they need.
A WebQuest is an internet-based activity in which students explore a topic or investigate a question by conducting research at pre-identified websites. It's organized to allow students to focus on using and interpreting information, not on spending time trying to find it. WebQuests for many subjects and grade levels are freely available on the internet, or you can create one yourself.
WebQuests were not developed with the notion of differentiation in mind, although they have some inherent flexibility in them. What a teacher in a differentiated classroom does is to realize that the various components can be modified in slight ways or in greater ways to allow the teacher to reach out for students' readiness needs, reach out to varied interests, allow them to work in ways that are most efficient for them.
If we're going to look at life in the 16th century, if we're going to look at life during Renaissance times, how does that help us with the play that we just took a look at?
Students were working on a unit in Romeo and Juliet, and throughout the unit, journaling and trying to make some real connections to what life was like then compared to now. That sort of took us into the WebQuest.
We are going to be participating in a WebQuest on Romeo and Juliet.
When I introduced the WebQuest, one of the things that I thought was really important was to show students what it looked like, because they hadn't done a WebQuest before. They had done things on the web.
A WebQuest is an interactive way to find out information. And the WebQuest, Georgia, that we're going to be working on is on Romeo and Juliet. The question that we're going to be looking at throughout this WebQuest is, how does looking at life and culture during Shakespeare's time help us to be more intelligent readers of his work?
When you're going through the WebQuest, it's really important to start on that first day with the guiding question, but it's also really important to reinforce that every single day. Ultimately, what I wanted students to be able to do with that, I told them there is a connection between life then and life now. How do you pull all those pieces together so we have a more informed understanding of the play that we studied?
Up on the overhead there is the WebQuest page. It says Romeo and Juliet, a quest upon the web.
It's important when you introduce a WebQuest to students that they understand how the process will go from beginning to end.
A WebQuest typically has 6 components. The introduction sets up the purpose of the WebQuest. The task describes what students must accomplish during the WebQuest. Resources include links to internet sites and other relevant sources. The process identifies specific steps students will follow as they work and the roles they'll play. Guidance includes ways to help students understand and organize the information. And the conclusion helps students reflect on what they've learned.
WebQuests could actually be used at a variety of points in an instructional cycle. It would be very interesting for a teacher to pose some questions which will become clearer to students as the unit progresses, and have students do an introductory WebQuest to begin to be familiar with subject matter before they actually ever even get deeply into the unit. Certainly it's possible for students to do a WebQuest as a culminating product of saying, here are the things we've learned, now let's look more broadly, pull those together, see what they can be used for, see how they play out in the real world. So WebQuests are very flexible, and they can be used really at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the instructional cycle.
What I'm going to show you is I'm going to take you through a couple of the pieces. We're going to take a look at the task, which is
It's really important to talk with students about the overall picture, but also what some of the steps are going to be so that you can reinforce those each day and come back to the guiding question.
So I want you to take a look at this. You can either read from your sheet or you can take a look up here.
The introduction to the Romeo and Juliet WebQuest tells students the roles that they're going to choose, whether it be actor, alchemist, historian, or critic. And in addition to telling them the roles, it also explains a little bit about what they'll be doing within the context of those roles. The task in the Romeo and Juliet WebQuest allows students to see that they are going to be doing an individual research as a part of a group of 4, and that the group of 4 will be responsible for some kind of a display or presentation.
Your task, and it's printed at the top of your sheet. The desired outcome of this quest upon the web is that you, the student, will have gained knowledge of Renaissance life, been enriched by having read one of the classic romances of all time, and of course on your sheet it says Romeo and Juliet, right? You'll be a part of a group of 4. That's your base group. You're sitting there right now.
To differentiate for this particular WebQuest, when I first set up the base groups, after thinking about their strengths and interests and talents, I set them up so that students were assigned by readiness based on where they were academically or where they were socially, because that was just as important for those group projects to ultimately be successful.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about those talents in just a minute, and we're going to give you an opportunity to tell each other why it is you think that you got put in the group that you got put in. That's really important.
In the process for a WebQuest, that's where most students will find out what it is that they're supposed to be able to do as an individual to bring back to their small group. And in this particular WebQuest, students looked at 4 different roles. They looked at actor, alchemist, historian, or critic.
If you take a look at the screen right now, you'll see what the process is if you're an actor. It shows you what an alchemist will do and what your job will be if you choose to be an alchemist. Talks about the historian and also about the critic.
In the Romeo and Juliet WebQuest that we used, the roles in particular in this WebQuest allow students to choose an area of interest that really mirrors their strength in a core area, math, science, English language arts, or social studies. And that was an opportunity for students who had particular strengths in other subjects besides mine to feel like they had something else that they could offer the group and then share within the context of the classroom.
Now in your small groups, you're going to talk about what it is that you're really good at or what it is you like to do. Okay? And a lot of times the thing you're most interested in is the thing that you also have a talent for.
It was really important to me that they choose something that they felt like they were good at, because then they'd be more likely to be successful.
Who's going to be the actor right now?
I got the actor.
Why?
Because I'm a good actor. I'm a good actor.
Okay, but take a look at the role. The role of an actor is to find out what?
How someone lives in 16th century London. Then you got to choose 2 or 3 different topics. And you got to learn about what type of food they had.
Some of the students, when they first looked at the task, thought, oh, I'm going to be a performer. And then they looked at it more closely and thought, oh, I'm going to look at what life was like. Students often will say, ooh.
So who's your alchemist?
Shit.
Portia. How come?
What about this role makes Portia good for it? What subject do you have to know to be good at being an alchemist?
Science.
Science. Are you the best science person in your group? Okay,
Because
so you're
she's smart.
okay. So because she's really smart, she's good at science. She'd be a good alchemist. What about the historian?
Smart.
Why?
Guess I like to think about traveling and stuff. I don't know.
Okay, so you like to think about traveling, so you'd be good at this because this is something you might actually do. Okay.
Learning profile options are also implicit in WebQuest. Some students like tasks that are far more analytical. Some really like the creative nature of envisioning what they're learning in new ways. Some students might have preferences for learning or expression that are more visual, some more oral. And so a WebQuest allows students to work in ways that are more efficient for them.
The final project is going to be to creatively present to the class what you've learned. This may be done by combining your individual work into a display or presentation. Notice on your sheet that I gave you some other options. It doesn't just say display or presentation. There are actually 4 options that we're going to give you rubrics for so you know how they're going to be scored. And if you take a look at those now, it says open option, a music option, it could be any kind of music, PowerPoint option, role play option, or traditional paper option. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those tomorrow.
As the WebQuest begins, it's really only fair that students understand how their work will be assessed. If there are particular components in their work that you expect to see, they need to know that up front. If there are descriptors of how better quality work would look, they need to have that up front.
I'm going to show you now a link. If you're an actor, when you click on the link, one of the things you'll notice is that you're going to come up with, depending upon what the link is, a whole compendium of knowledge. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. And so you're going to have to choose some of those topics to figure out what life was like. Portia, give me a topic.
The wedding.
The wedding. So if we click on wedding, notice that it takes us to a page that says wedding and betrothals. And if we were to scroll down, it would teach us about what weddings and betrothals were like during the 16th century.
Some of the links and what you'll find with WebQuest sometimes if they haven't been updated for a while is that some of the links are broken. I created for students a hot list of links that would aid them in looking at their roles.
Now, for the links that are broken, tomorrow I am going to give you an address to go to, and that address has something called a hot list. And a hot list is a collection of links that I created for you so that if you go to a link and it doesn't work, it'll take you right to what it is that you're supposed to learn about. Okay? So you'll be able to answer the question, you'll be able to do your role. And remember, that goes back to our question, which is what we're trying to figure out about this unit. How does looking at life and culture during Shakespeare's time help us to be more intelligent readers of his work?
In planning a WebQuest, I'm thinking about a number of things. What are the learning goals for the unit? Can I tell you precisely what students should know, what they should understand, and just exactly what they should be able to do as a result of this particular WebQuest? And then I need to be reflecting constantly on the students that I teach. Who are they? What do they like? What makes them excited about learning? How do I develop multiple tasks in such a way that students are going to get where they need to go, but so that it works for a variety of students?
When I'm choosing a WebQuest or when I'm looking at a website to see if it's something I would want to use with my students, I look at what students have to do and I see if it's a task that matches what students might be interested in. But then I also take a look at the teacher resource page. Teacher page in a WebQuest helps the teacher because it allows for the teacher to see all of the pages that students would potentially go to. The standards are almost always on the teacher resource page, and so if you yourself are trying to figure out what is it that I want them to know, understand, and be able to do, you can go there and say, does it meet the standards of your state, or does it meet national standards?
A WebQuest offers many opportunities for a teacher to reach out to address students' readiness levels. For example, not all students have to do exactly the same task, and some of the tasks can be at a higher level of demand than other tasks might be. Resources offer a great way for teachers to reach out to students by bookmarking certain websites at different levels of readability. Even using websites that are in a variety of languages could be helpful for second language learners, so resources offer a great chance for variance. And certainly the guidance or the scaffolding that a teacher offers to guide a student's work can be varied based on readiness.
I have thought about student readiness and assigned them to base groups based on a lot of different things that I had looked at over the year. I took a long time thinking about who would be best matched personality-wise with who is a good leader, or who is not afraid to speak in front of the group. Early on, I had given them an interest survey, and throughout the year, you collect lots of different data on the kids. So once students chose the role they were interested in, they went out and did research and had the opportunity to work with other students who also had chosen that role. As a management tool for myself, I color-coded the groups because when I was helping students, I wanted to be able to go to the student and know what I was talking about right away, since there were 4 different going on with research all at the same time. And so my actors were blue, and my alchemists were green, and my historians were yellow, and my critics were red. So I could see right away if somebody with a red paper was holding up his or her hand, oh, okay, the critic needs help. And I could say, this is the web page you need to be on. These are some places that I've found that will help you. This is what another student with the same role is doing. Within each of the colored role groups then, I also used tiered assignments. The actors were to first research what it was like to live during Shakespeare's time. It was really the social studies task. To tier the assignment, students who need a little more support were asked to write a 2-page paper reflecting upon what it was like to be a student in Shakespeare's day versus what it's like to be a student now. Some of my more able students, I opened up the task so that they could write it as if they were journaling about the experiences from a first-hand perspective. And so, having taken the task from the WebQuest, I changed the task a little bit so that the students who were a little bit more able had a more open-ended opportunity for the way that they were going to express that as an individual project versus the students who maybe needed more scaffolding and support. I made their task much more structured, in some ways more traditional, so that the steps were more logical or accessible. In alchemy, religion, this is how they define it.
So we can say religion means reconnection of the human. So,
And did you get that?
right here. Okay, so you can write the first sentence, but put it in your own words.
Some of the students would definitely need more support than some of the other students. I mean, some of them were my learning different students, and some of them were my gifted and talented students in the same color group because they're interested maybe in the same thing. But then, before I even started them on the WebQuest, I needed to come up with some kind of a tool to figure out what would make them both be successful.
The teacher developed tiered worksheets to guide the students as they gathered information. 2 sets of worksheets were created for each of the 4 roles. For students who needed additional support, she provided scaffolding in the form of graphic organizers and more detailed questions.
You don't have to use this graphic organizer, but what this does is then you could say, okay, how should I take my trip? Hotel. Hotel 1 costs this much. Hotel 2 costs this much. So you can price compare before you ever create your outline, so you can pick the best one. Or if it's easier for you, you can just look at it and say, oh, obviously this is cheaper, and this is the one I would go on. But students who could use more specific questions could write on the pages that I gave them, could ask other people, and had more check-in points.
Miss Benyi?
Okay.
Okay, I'm done with this.
Okay, so let's talk about that. There were very specific stopping points. After you've done this much research, you must see me. In just a few minutes, you're going to share with the other people who are also historians. The next role was the historian role. As I explained it to students, if we're looking at a connection between the culture of Romeo and Juliet and the modern culture, then we should really understand what London's like now. The historian's job was to plan a trip to modern-day England and to come up with an outline of the cost, and you might fill in some of the information. Did you get prices for all of these? I just want to know this research information. I need to see either how you would take this trip if you're actually going to take it, or how you would sell this trip if you want someone else to take it. To open up that task a little bit more, I gave some of the students the opportunity to create a brochure instead of the outline. Okay, so here's the deal. Notice that you have two options. You can either make a schedule that says we're going here and here and here and here, and this is how much it's going to cost, or you can make a travel brochure and give some more general information. In this WebQuest, the Alchemists were supposed to create a poster that explained 16th century science compared to modern science, and also address a question about how you would explain an atom to a scientist from the 16th century. To open up that task a little bit more, provided both the opportunity for students to do a poster and a full paper, or to include the answer for that in their display somehow, so that it was really evident what they had to do. The fourth role is the critic's role, and I had some students who really were interested in criticism. The critic was responsible for taking a closer look at the text and to write their information as if they were a critic for a newspaper or magazine. I tiered the task to allow for students who were maybe more able to write their information, coming up with some relevant literary terms, looking at critical analysis and putting all of that together into a paper.
And there's a lot of things that are written about Shakespeare.
In addition, there were some resources in the library. There were contemporary criticism books for students who were critics.
And Shakespeare in his world is fun. Shakespeare play-by-play, so that would critique some of his plays one at a time. And Shakespeare in his age, that might be fun too, the world of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. So there you go.
While a WebQuest is certainly focused on internet resources, it's helpful for students to understand that there are paper resources they can find in a library, that there's a teacher down the hall who may know something, that someone in their community may be a great repository of information, and that the internet can be used for emailing people, for example, and hooking up with experts in that way as well. The WebQuest should be a means of expanding a student's repertoire of research skills, not restricting them.
Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have the historians then take a break and come over to this table right here, because we're going to talk about your independent projects. I want you to, all the yellow people, move here right now.
To make sure that students aren't just doing research and writing it down, but not processing it all. Students were involved in opportunities to talk with people who were doing like research.
Go through and share what you have for your information right now. Okay. Red people, come on down. Right here.
They spent some time in role groups or in groups with people who were also doing the same kinds of tasks, the same kinds of questions, and they shared what they had learned. And I also asked them to, if they didn't have the information, to record that information so that they did have it, so that they all had a really solid base to bring back to their home groups or their base groups.
So what you got for the definition?
Definition is for alchemy, is refers to an early practice like chemistry and physics and anthology.
Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy because why? What happens at the end in Act 5? Everybody dies. What did the one reviewer say was the reason that Romeo and Juliet died? What about their love? That they were both too what? Impulsive. So that would be like their tragic flaw in his mind.
It really gave a lot of support to students who needed someone else there to talk with about what it was they were seeing or learning or doing.
What did the people think about science during the 16th century?
Metal and spiritual worlds were tied. That's what I found.
Okay, what are you working on?
Because of the way a WebQuest is set up and because the individual tasks really do hold students accountable for what they're learning, there are opportunities within the WebQuest where you really are coaching students along.
So you've finished this one?
No, actually, I'm not.
Okay. They had to check in with me. They had to check in with each other. And oftentimes that was informal. The thing that you might want to do is you might want to take a shorter note here as long as you have the source so that you can go back to it. And then you can take a look at the next topic.
Okay.
Or, since you've got Portia next to you, Portia, are you done with this part here? When you finish this one, since you've got so much detail, you might want to flip-flop.
Okay.
You might want to give her some of these details, and you might want to give her some of these details that you took down. So then you don't both have to do the whole thing all over again.
Okay.
Because you're going to share them with your role groups in just a little bit anyway.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right, what do you have over here? You. They had to be accountable because they had to bring this information back to their base group, and their final projects depended upon what they learned individually. What's one thing that you learned about language? So one of the things about language in Shakespeare is that the formal or the familiar forms, the ones that you'd say with your friends, and the formal forms sometimes get mixed together. Like sometimes you might call me by my first name. That would be a familiar form that you might mix into a sentence with a more formal address. They had individual questions that I had used for each of the tasks, questions that they had to answer about what it was they were supposed to be finding out. That was one way to check to see if students were, first of all, finding the information that they were looking for, but also understanding what it was that they were supposed to individually bring back to their base groups.
Teaching often doesn't give us the opportunities that we need to really collaborate with one another. WebQuest can be a great opportunity to do that. If I'm game for talking with teachers who are experts in other subject areas, I can make my WebQuest much more interdisciplinary and much richer for more students. On the other hand, I may want to talk with some specialists in the building to help them see how I can scaffold a task better for a student with a learning disability or make it more complex for a student who is very advanced.
Any of the historians who are here, did you in math yesterday, did Mr. Morrell show you how to do the conversion from pounds to dollars in this group? Okay, so today in math, you are going to ask him to show you how to convert the pounds to dollars because he showed some of the historians yesterday.
We happen to have the opportunity to be a part of an interdisciplinary team. I made white copies for all of us adults so our eyes don't fall out, and then colored them so that if a kid comes to you, the students who have yellow will probably need your help with the conversion. They have to plan a trip to London, so they're going to need to convert from dollars to pounds. They were really willing to help out with the students and getting them to understand some of the ideas in each of their own subject areas. Oh, that would be helpful.
Is there anything on the calculators that?
Well, no, there's not anything on calculator. Something on the internet that it's an exchange
yeah.
system.
Right.
For example, the math teacher gave me a link to put on my Broken Links page once we got into the WebQuest that he had found to teach students about conversion for the historian role. I was so fortunate to have the team members that I have because they supported the students in many different ways. For this task, the actors are probably going to need your help because it's really the history part of it.
Okay.
And one of the things about the site, I know you took a look at it, is that they get lost kind of easily with all of the different nuances for the Renaissance life, and they're not sure what they're supposed to do. The Montagues, I said, okay, well, if they're willing to look at it, I'm going to go ahead and try it. Then they were willing to look at the tasks as I had broken them down and say, well, this is a way I think I can help with that.
So they're going to return to Shakespeare time.
Precisely.
Okay, so this is sort of a compare, contrast.
Yes.
On choice one.
So the WebQuest that I did choose was an interdisciplinary WebQuest. The students you'll see are going to be working on science then versus science now. And so that's their big thing. So if they're asking you for help, they're supposed to be trying to figure out the comparisons between the two.
Okay.
Like a lot of the students didn't understand why it would be plausible for Juliet to be dead, except for the fact that the stethoscope wasn't even invented, and so we just had to have a trained ear to listen. So because it was a team effort, the students could ask so many people. And I think that there were more students who were successful because of that.
The next problem that I gave you was 2 pounds. All right, now, let's say I'm going to give you an odd number. Let's say I gave you the number 26. I have $26 in my pocket. Oh, no, let's make it hard. $26.25. 26.25. What am I going to have to multiply times 26.25 to get pounds? Tell me what it is. Yeah.
0.55.
Yeah. And what do you get?
You get 14.43.
Okay, now look, check it out. That's 14.437. Is it going to be 14.43 or 14.44? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly. You round up.
Ultimately, what is it that we're trying to answer? What's our question?
How Romeo and Juliet relates to us now.
Okay, exactly. In your base groups today, I want you to report on what you learned individually from your research. Some of the research that you did, you said, some of this information I'm sort of still trying to figure out how it fits. That's why you have 4 collective heads, or in some cases 5 collective heads. You're going to need every single person's brain to put this together for your group project. Right? Ready?
I'll tell everybody.
Go.
Know when to stop.
They didn't understand elements, and when they tried to turn lead into gold, but they couldn't.
I also learned that boys and girls from the age of 5 were usually taught the reading and writing of English at a petty school.
They made a lot of bread, different kind of bread. And
What do you think about it today? How did it change?
Hang on 1 second. Wait, who's the energizer in this group right now?
You talking the manager?
He's the reporter, so who's the energizer? So Chu, before you can move on to the next person sharing, it's your job now to repeat what you heard her say, so that Derek can get down all the information and so that everybody in the group is clear on what it was that Cherie talked about, what it is that she learned from the experience.
They didn't know how to check pause. You know how we know if somebody's dead, like we can check their pause. They didn't know how, so that's how it changed. And my definition was Alchemist is to refuse to, like when you have your funeral back in Shakespeare time, they bury you and put you in the grave, and then they have your funeral at that time, and everybody, you know how you have an open castle like we have? They didn't have that. You just be buried. So a lot of people was like, alive, buried alive. That's crazy.
Typically, a product that's a good one will call on students to use what the information means, not just what it says. And every aspect of the WebQuest ought to be pointing the student not to regurgitation of knowledge, not to copying of information, but synthesis, analysis, looking at stuff through multiple perspectives, so that what they do runs through the filter of their minds and becomes theirs.
I offered them a choice of what their final products would look like. They all had to have something that was written or something that was performable or something that was something that they could have in hand, as well as the presentation part. Students who chose their own final group option were to talk to me about what it was that they wanted to do. How was it different than the tasks that I did provide for them, and what was it that they were going to do? The students who chose the open option, in most cases, in their base group, they couldn't agree on one of the options, and so they figured out a way that they were to combine it.
I feel sorry for the man because you got a plan. I feel sorry
now we have a plan.
for the man.
Because now we have a plan.
Because now we got a plan.
We have a plan.
Oh, have a plan, sorry.
That's it.
Okay. Let's see. Is that all for the course? Yeah.
A really exciting part of a WebQuest can be students sharing their final products with one another. That works on a lot of levels. It's much more compelling for students to have an audience for their work other than the teacher. And so being able to share with peers, or in fact even an audience outside the classroom, can be very, very motivating for a lot of students.
Students are going to reflect upon their learning of this particular WebQuest through the conclusion, which is often the sharing of their group projects. They're going to have the opportunity to do some self-reflection about what it is that I learned, and did I meet some of these goals that we set out at the beginning of the unit.
Too much killings and violence. What I disliked about the play is how Juliet's parents forced her to marry Paris. I dislike all the killing and violence. It's just not me. From a fighting perspective, it's too bloody. But now we have to get deep. with the drama. And I'm going to calm down with the characters because I like Romeo and Juliet.
I'm using WebQuest because not only does it extend the learning in a particular area, but it also gives students opportunities to be accountable for something that they're interested in. It gives students an opportunity to take on a role, take on a responsibility. It gives students exposure to technology, which is really important in most of the jobs that they'll have in the future.
Differentiated WebQuests are wonderful opportunities for kids to work on powerful ideas with technology that's compelling to them, in work configurations that are exciting and productive, in ways that address their